Yá'át'ééh. Good morning, my relatives. Today is Monday, June 27th, and I'm sitting down for my second cup of coffee. And I'm very excited because I get to introduce you to a very good friend of mine and a tremendous advocate for Indian country, Levi Rickert, who is from the Prairie Band of the Potawatomi Nation. And he is the founder, the publisher, and the editor of Native News Online. I met Levi about a decade ago when I was hosting a reading of the Buried Apology to Native Peoples in front of the U.S. Capitol, and Native News Online and Levi Rickert came and covered that event personally, and so we got to know each other well from there, and have become friends and colleagues for the past decade since then. So anyway, but before I bring Levi on, I want to just start by acknowledging, as I always do, that I'm speaking to you from what's now known as Washington, D.C. But these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway, and I want to honor the Piscataway as the host people of these lands. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to just state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. So, my Piscataway relatives. So let me go ahead and bring Levi on now, and we can get our conversation going.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Levi, Yá'át'ééh, good morning. It's great to have you here this morning.
I'm happy to be here, and I want to inform your viewers that I am coming from Grand Rapids, Michigan, the land of the people of the three fires, the Odawa, the Chippewa, and or Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi or Potawatomi. I happen to be Potawatomi.
Well, thank you. Thank you for acknowledging the people of those lands, and thank you for joining us from a city I know well, which is Grand Rapids. I've traveled there many times over the past probably 20 years of my life, and have had a lot of breakfasts with you sitting
Yes.
in restaurants there, eating and
We,
hanging out
we,
and
we like
talking
our
about.
coffee. We like our coffee and breakfast.
Yeah. So, yeah, Levi is a very natural guest for my second cup of coffee because we've shared many cups of coffee together. Levi, I want to talk for a few minutes about just your work with Native News Online, and I want to acknowledge people who are on the screen with us. We have Andrea who's joining us. Thanks for joining. We have Debbie who's joined us, and Nathan as well as Becky. Yá'át'ééh. Thank you everyone for joining this conversation this morning. But Levi, can tell us just a little bit about Native News Online. How did you start it? What was your vision for it? And what has it grown into today? Like, what has it become right now?
Okay. Well, yes, and I would want to say that the genesis of Native News Online began when I was called into a editorial meeting with the Lansing State Journal, and that's like 60 miles where our state capital, Michigan, is in Lansing, Michigan. The Lansing State Journal, and they had convened that year four different focus groups: African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, and American Indians, Alaska Natives. And the focus groups were, and they were separate groups. We were the last one of the year, a few days before Christmas that year. And the question was presented: how can they better serve our Native population as the Lansing State Journal in terms of their coverage? And I was a little embarrassed that day because two of my colleagues uh, basically went off on them and said, "Hey, you only cover us if you're talking, if we're fighting with each other amongst ourselves as tribes or communities. You cover us about the drunk Indian," and I say that just kind of how it was presented, and the high levels of poverty, all the negative sides to it. And so I was a little embarrassed, and that was around the time that the Hard Rock Cafe the Seminole tribe purchased the Hard Rock Cafe concept. And a lot of people don't know that, but the Seminole tribe owns Hard Rock. And so I actually was on my way back from Lansing and car by myself thinking, well, instead of sitting around complaining about it, why don't we have our own media? Well, I already knew about Indian Country Today and some other publications. And then later that weekend, I was up online kind of late at night, and I found something I didn't even know existed, the Native American Journalists Association. So I got into that, and they had done with a grant, they had done a report, produced a report called the Reading Red Report, and basically said the very same things my colleagues said. They had actually observed for 1 year 14 of the largest newspapers in America, New York Times, all the way out to LA Times, And in between, well, basically the findings were the same as what the colleagues said. The only covers that were fighting with each other,
Yeah.
on and on. And so I actually, from that, I actually started thinking, well, why don't we have our own publication? Why don't I? So I started it, and I'll say this: we started February 15th, 2011, and through our analytics, we determined 16 people had come to the website that week. And so that's not even my family, because I have a large Potawatomi family. Not even my circle of friends. I have a large circle of friends. So, but since then, I'm happy to report we have over 3 million people come to the website. We are one of the leading Native American publications in America. We are really, we're well read, from members of Congress, the White House, Native people across America, tribes. And so I'm really happy with it. Obviously, we want to keep improving. I'm one of these guys that you can never do it well enough. You got to keep improving. And that's what we're trying to do at Native News Online. And by that, we actually do some live streams similar to this. And we have something that's very popular. It just started this year, called Native Badashquay. And Badashquay is a Potawatomi word that is kind of root of it is the spotlight, but it really means literally spreading more light. And so what it is we take people who are in the news, making news and leading change in Indian country, and spotlight them on Fridays at noon. And that has become very, very popular. And so those of you who are out there, we'll go to our Facebook on Friday at noon, and we have a guest. And actually, we'll have a meeting this afternoon to determine who our guest will be this coming Friday. I don't even know yet. I've been traveling and just kind of getting back into things. And then my good friend Mark says, "Hey, can you come on?" And so here I am.
Yeah, well, thank you. I remember how early you started Native News Online back in 2011, and it was in 2012, December 19, when you and I met, when we hosted the reading of that apology. And you were seriously one of the few journalists who actually showed up for that event. We sent out press releases to a lot of the mainstream media, and you traveled, I think, at your own expense, all the way from Grand Rapids to join us in front of the Capitol building. And I remember being deeply encouraged by that, and then by the coverage that you provided for that event on Native News Online. And then, of course, over the years, I've done a fair amount of writing. We even tried to do a little DC correspondent work with me from here. And so I've written a ton of op-eds for Native News Online, and I felt for my own platform, Native News Online was very instrumental in help even establishing some of my voice. But yeah, so I deeply appreciate the work that you've done and the work that you're continuing to do.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Mark. And I will say this: your op-eds, your editorials were some of the most read. I mean, particularly the one around 4th of July. So maybe you need to we dust that one off and then run it again. It's coming up, right? So
yeah, I've been pondering. After I finished my book in 2019, I kind of had my fill of writing for a while, and I haven't written many op-eds over the past 3 years. But I'm really getting to the point now where I feel like I have some things I want to say, and I'm debating some kind of key articles I want to write in the next 6 to 9 months. And obviously, we'll submit a version of that to Native News Online and other publications out there. But yeah, I think there's some things we definitely need to continue to push the envelope on, not only in Indian country, but even in the nation. One of the questions I want to ask you, because this is true for any Native publication, right? Obviously, you're trying to reach Native peoples and you're trying to report about Indian country for Indian country, but you also attract a large number of non-natives who read your publication and are using your site as a resource to understand more of what's going on within Indian country and getting a different perspective on the news. How have you seen Native News Online positively impact both Indian country as well as the rest of the country as a whole?
Well, and we get a tremendous amount of emails from people who write in and say, "Thank you so much for doing what you do." And I really appreciate the kind words. One of the things that comes up a lot in those emails is the idea that people will say, "Why didn't I learn this in school?" And thank you for educating us as to who you are as Native people. And I think that's key. I think it's really key is that part of what we're doing at Native News Online is really changing the narrative about Indian country, because people still want to keep us in their mind as the noble savages on the horse riding off into the sunset, the vanishing Indian. And so we still exist. Even now on graphics, you see often when they break down demographics, Caucasian, white, Latino, Hispanic, African American, Black, Asian Americans, and then other. We get lost in the other, and CNN made the mistake on election night of calling us something else. So that's and of course there were memes all over about that. They were really cute, but and humorous. But in all seriousness, in terms of having our proper place in modern society, particularly in places such as Michigan, we have, I want to say, less than 5,000 Native Americans here where I live in Grand Rapids, and sometimes you feel kind of isolated. You feel very, very lost in the crowd, so to speak. Versus when I was in Santa Fe and Albuquerque, I was with a friend of mine at breakfast last Friday, and we looked over the tables and there were Native people, and I'm thinking, it's really nice to be in a city where there are other Native people. And I jokingly told one of my sisters, I said, yeah, I might see my Aunt Yvonne here and there at a restaurant, but I don't see a lot of Native people in Grand Rapids. And so we still exist, but in terms of the influence of Native News that's done, I know that we get exclusives from the White House. We have high credibility. Members of Congress read the stories. Certainly their staff do, because we get emails if they send a press release, say, hey, you haven't written so-and-so Congresswoman's editorial yet or whatever, but we know we're being noticed, and we're hoping we make a difference. And when it's all said and done, Mark, when I'm dead and gone, I hope they say Levi helped change the needle. That's really what I'm trying to do, is change the needle a little bit about who we are as Native people, and really do it in a positive way, and really, really impact positive change for Native people, because we are in, and I like to talk about this as kind of this moment as Native Americans. We are in a moment where, for the first time ever, we have a cabinet secretary in a presidential cabinet, Deb Haaland being Secretary of the Interior. We have, just last week, the president named the Treasurer of the United States is now the Mohican Chief. So we are in a moment. You see the rise of, in the high popularity of television shows such as Res Dogs in Rutherford Falls. And so we are in this moment, but I'm going to say this, Mark. It's and you. I know you're a very positive thinker. It's what you do with the opportunities, with those moments. We're in this moment. We have these opportunities to really make a difference, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. It's very good to see. People know who follow my channel. I really admire Deb Haaland. I'm grateful for her and for many others who are really kind of pushing the envelope in a lot of places. I get frustrated because a lot of times the system tries to mute their voice or not really let them stand for the stuff they absolutely stand for. But I deeply respect the fact that they are there and they are pushing the envelope in every way that they can.
If I may say one thing about that, I think that we have to be really cognizant of the fact that it's hard for one individual within the massive bureaucracy of the federal government, meaning with Secretary Howell, the idea that she could go in and change 230 years of horrible policy against Native Americans. She can't do it by herself. And so, and it's not to say we cut her slack, but I think we have to be gracious about it and realize that she's working hard every single day to working up. It's a system that you and I both know. I mean, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which she heads, that's the Department of the Interior heads, it did not originate in the Department of Interior. You know where it originated? Department of War back in the 1830s. So I mean, think about that. That was planned genocide, basically. Now they wouldn't use that term, but they were out to get us, and they were out to defeat us and to destroy who we were as Native people. And if they couldn't kill us, they put us in boarding schools. So anyway, you and I can talk about this stuff.
Levi and I, we could go on for several hours here if we wanted to, but I know there's a few things I want to make sure we get out in this interview. And one is a story that I know Native News Online has been covering extensively, which is the boarding school story and the reports that came out of their part of the interior, but also just the ongoing saga of learning more about the horrors of the boarding schools. How can you even summarize some of that coverage, and what is Native News Online doing to help make sure that story stays in front of people and tries to get the message of that story out to people?
Yeah, that's the power of Native American news or publications, is the idea that we can stay very focused on news items that the mainstream media, quite frankly, they come in during, I call it the shiny object, or others might call it the flavor of the day, flavor of the week, flavor of the month. But we stuck with it. And since Camp Loops, when the discovery of the 215 unmarked graves up in Camp Loops, the residential school in British Columbia in Canada, late May of 2021, we have done over 100 stories, several live streams about the Indian boarding school experience. And many of us, and I'm older, so many of us already knew a lot of the things that happened, but in life, we don't know everything about everything. And so I have learned a whole lot myself, but one of the most disturbing things I think we have covered and we've talked about our newsroom is how they handled the bodies of these children that died. It was sad that they died, but just this last week, our reporter was covering a story where a family had gone down last week, and not this past weekend, but the weekend before, to retrieve a body of this little boy from decades ago, and they could not find the body. They dug a grave, and they had a girl they had two people in one grave. And I mean, you hear these stories that kind of gets to the core of your stomach. You're like, oh my goodness. And then when you read about it, and some of these stories come in late at night. And so I have to tell you, on a personal level, I find many of them very disturbing and sometimes very difficult to sleep at night, because I toss and turn because I'm thinking about some of that history. And that's the nature of the news business, covering the horrific, hard stories. And I guess I'm okay with that, but I will say that it is disturbing on a personal level. And I noted when on May 11th, when the report was released, Secretary Holland, Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Indian Affairs, Brian Newland, they were all teary-eyed. They were very choked up. And somebody sent me a note. I watched the press release, or excuse me, the press conference from May 11th here in my office via live stream. But somebody sent me a note, said everybody in the room were crying that day. And so these stories are tragic. And I will say this, that we will keep continuing to cover Native News Online's coverage of Indian boarding schools, because to me it's a very important story. As Assistant Secretary Newland said, every single Native American in America, whether they even know it or not, have been negatively impacted by Indian boarding schools. And I think it's the intergenerational trauma that we talk about. That's why it's an important story.
Well, thank you, Levi, for keeping that story in front of not only Indian country, but really the rest of the nation. The last thing I want to talk about is there's a book that you've published through Native News Online. It's called Visions for a Better Indian Country, One Potawatomi Editor's Opinions. And it's a collection of your op-eds, I think, that you've written over the years, many of which I've read and have deeply appreciated. And you decided to gather them together and put them into a book. Tell us about this book. Tell us what your hope for this book is, and kind of what your thoughts are about it, and how's it doing?
Well, and I'll say this, I'm pretty happy with it. Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell, the former U.S. Senator from Colorado, wrote the introduction. I was really honored. We had some really great comments, some previews of the book by some of our colleagues and some of the tribal chairmen out there, in Chief Hoskin, President Ness from Navajo Nation. So I was really pleased with it. We kind of put it together as a fundraiser for Native News Online, and you can go online, and we're asking $30 for the donation for the book. But I will say this, that it's one more opportunity to change that narrative for Indian country. And that's really what it's about. And the title itself, One Potawatomi Editor's Opinions, speaks to the notion that I really view myself as one spokesperson. I'm not arrogant enough or stupid enough to think I speak for all Native Americans in the United States, but it's really truly my opinions. And I feel very fortunate that the Creator has put me in a position where I can have a voice in Indian country, speak for what I feel very strongly about, because we know we still suffer from some of the highest disparities, health disparities, housing disparities, on and on. And even with the positive things that are going on, there's still a lot of work to be done. And hopefully, as I said earlier, I can help change the needle on that for Indian country.
Yeah. Well, Levi, thank you. I'm very excited about this book. I put the links to it in the comment section of both my Facebook and YouTube. And so if you want to read about the book on Native News Online or get the book to directly purchase it by making I think it's a $30 donation to Native News Online, you will be able to get a copy of that book. And I highly recommend reading it. Levi has written some fantastic op-eds over the years, and this is a collection of the highlights of those op-eds. And so I highly encourage people to get a copy of this book, Visions for a Better Indian Country.
Well,
Levi,
you, yes.
I really appreciate you taking time to join me. For those of you who follow me on social media, you know that I also have a Patreon page. And one of the things I like to do each month is to have a follow-up Q&A on my Patreon site with a guest I have during the month. And so I'm going to put the link right now into the comment on my Patreon page, beginning in about 10 minutes. Levi and I are going to take a quick break, and then we're going to jump over onto a Zoom call. And if you would like to join this Q&A, on my Patreon site, you can subscribe to the Ask Questions tier of my Patreon, which is a $10 subscription per month. And there you can, you'll get a link for the Zoom call, the Zoom meeting we're going to have, and you're welcome to join us now. And if you have a question for Levi, you can definitely take time to ask it there. But Levi, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an honor knowing you. It's been an honor working with you, and it's been an honor to have you as a guest, drinking our second cups of coffee together here
That's
today,
right.
and talking about important things like Native news and what's going on around Indian country.
Yes, thank you, Mark.
Anything you want to say before we finish up here?
Well, keep following Mark to his viewers, and follow us if you're not familiar with Native News, please join us, because we really do try to make a good, positive impression about Native America and Indian country overall. So, miigwech.
Thank you, Levi. I want to thank, looks like Munchie Bear joined us from Gallup, New Mexico. Hey, that's great to see someone from Gallup there. Andrea, thanks for joining us today. Holly McGough, thanks for joining today. Adam, I appreciate you being on with us, and Terry, as well as Shoshi Morgan. I want to thank everybody. Shantina, thanks for joining us today. It's really good to have you a part of these discussions and to join these conversations with us. And walk in beauty, my relatives, and maybe learn how to walk in beauty together. Feel free to join us on Patreon in a few minutes if you'd like to join the follow-up Q&A there in just a few minutes. Hakone.